All right, good afternoon. Number 5 out of 6. We're doing well. So this, once again, for those of you who are new, this is the the IDSA, the Identity Defined Security Alliance. Apologize. We're dealing with the Zero Trust Identity story, and through this process, we're going to talk about integrations and understand this is about GA integrations. This is about getting these products to work together, and there's not custom work done. It's complete configuration to support these stories. This is thus the future is now. We're not talking about vaporware here. And then, of course, the Zero Trust Identity story is don't trust the devices, don't trust the users. So as you can see, this is the 430 or the fifth 5 of 6. We're going to talk about a Netskope and ping integration using an Optiv adapter. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris, and there you have at it.
Hi, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Beautiful. I can't tell anymore. It's been a long week. Why are we here? So we're just kind of talking about shadow IT and securing that and making sure that we can secure access to resources based on the credentials and through a CASB provider, making sure that people aren't doing what they're not supposed to be allowed to do, like downloading data and tracking all that activity, and also making sure that they're not doing it with compromised credentials, so we can actually do a credential check and alter the behavior of the access to that piece. So all around verifying that user authentication, that the credential is good, performing MFA if we need to, and then limiting the privileges on what they're allowed to do with the resource that they've accessed. Our use case here is the access management checking against a CASB provider. I believe we have a little bit of, there we go. So this is kind of the stack that we're doing. We're doing the access management on the identity side, and then we're doing the security angle through the CASB and working together to provide all of the posture that you want to enforce. So the architecture here is really somebody tries to access an application, they end up being delivered to an authentication engine, in this case being Federate. We perform a single sign-on event, potentially with MFA. It's not quite clear, it depends on how we're configured. There is a redirect through Netskope to get to the application. So we do a SAML proxy connection through. Actually, this is one use case. I'll get to this one here in a second. But we do a connection through Netskope to get access. In addition, we can also do this confirm user identity, which is checking against a compromised credential data store. So as part of the we've got the authentication event happening at ping, and then as we pass you through Netskope, it is checking to make sure you're allowed to get there, and that if your credential is compromised, you get redirected back, and we can either fail you or we can force MFA and a whole set of things to decide what to do next. Did I get that right?
You did. I'll expand on that just a little bit here. In addition, when the user's going to log on, one thing that ping can do is check and validate whether or not that endpoint has the Netskope client installed. And if it doesn't, what we can end up doing is redirect that user to go download the client, and then that way they have that on their system, and we're going to be steering traffic, and that's going to support native applications and unsanctioned applications. So once they get that client installed, now we can actually restrict access to, again, unsanctioned applications and devices that are using native type apps. So if you're very familiar with like Office 365 and the multiple authentication mechanisms, when it comes to native apps, you really need to think about what your deployment strategy is there.
Cool. That's good stuff.
Yeah, and we'll talk about the demo flow. So we're going to do 2 demos here. The first one is we're going to take a look at compromised credentials.
Nope, that's the second one.
Oh, that'll be the second one. All right. So the first one that we're going to end up doing.
Would you like it to be the first one?
Nah, it's fine. We're going to showcase the integration with ping identity and the ability to do a reverse proxy. That really comes down to you have an unmanaged device or an asset, you have a sanctioned application, and you want to control access to that. Probably the biggest use case I see around today is Office 365. So users now have these credentials. How do I actually prevent them from using a device that's not authorized, or let's say their credentials do get compromised? And how do we actually put controls and constraints around that? Then the second thing that we're going to be showcasing is we're going to take a look at compromised credentials. So what Netskope does is when all these big data breaches happen, where all these creds are taken, we go scour, we find them. We don't care about passwords or hashes or anything. We're just grabbing the user names. Reason being, we're going to make an assumption here that, and it probably is better than it used to be, users tend to use the same password, right? So in that particular instance, when this check happens, we're going to go through, they're going to query Netskope and say, hey, by the way, does this user have a compromised credential? If that user does, we're going to go and step up the authentication and then make them change their password. Point being, the assumption of them using that password in other places, let's mitigate that risk and increase the security posture by doing that. Good, ready for the demo? All right, hopefully this is better than my last one. I hope there's not any cars that I have to select or tiles. No.
I wasn't involved in the last one, so of course it's going to be better.
I've got Chris running, so.
Really? Notice how I said that as if it was true.
All right.
Okay, so the key is that we're logging into a portal. So we've gone to a portal. It's really a landing page for us, and we're going to log in with, if I can spell the name, control plus demo. So this authentication here is running against Ping Federate. So it's really the SSO end of this. Oh, for crying out loud. So my demos were doing fine until you. It's like the Laurel and Hardy show at this point. I'm not asking who's who though. Plus sign. Oh yeah. So we've logged into a portal. I have a link at the bottom here. This link here, what it does is it does the proxying through Netskope to get to Salesforce. And really, we're going to shift through. We're going to do a SAML call across through Netskope, and then there'll be a SAML call to Salesforce, and it puts Netskope in control of the activity that's going on within the application. Here, and if you look at the URL, you can see that we're while we are going to Salesforce and we do get a Salesforce experience here, we are going through Netskope here, and Netskope is in complete control.
Yep. If you take a look at the URL, you'll see it's rproxy.goscope.com. Key thing to point out here, I don't know if anybody's ever done TLS SSL decryption in a large organization. If you have, you've probably felt the pain of having to understand how do I get that cert out there, what operating systems, what browsers are being used, a lot of context to take in. You'll notice we didn't get an error there. So the end user experience is quite nice. So.
Yep. Okay. So that would be demo number 1.
Yep. And so a few things to point out. We didn't do it in this particular demo, but when we've got that reverse proxy, keep in mind we're decrypting traffic, and we're also doing DLP inspection. So we have an enterprise class DLP engine. It's got quite a few policies right out of the box, typically around regulatory compliance, 3,000 identifiers, 500 true type files. So we're inspecting and looking for sensitive information. Additionally, we're also looking for threats. So we do static analysis, dynamic analysis. Netskope's got a cloud threat research team. So some of the stuff you traditionally see on endpoints, hey, stuff's being born in the cloud now. I don't need to get to an endpoint. I can run all this up in the cloud. So things to keep in mind there.
I figured I'd show them this bit too for you. So this is just to show that Netskope is in control of that connection all the way through. You can see this is the set of activity that I just performed. So there was a login for this account, and then this account did a couple of posts. So while we were running through the Netskope proxy, the application was, or at least Netskope was watching all the activity that we were doing.
Yeah, so the neat thing is, here we have an opportunity to be the access control point, so we can put those constraints on there. The other interesting piece is, as we showed earlier in some use cases, the ability to take our log data and bring that into another platform where we can make very highly automated and intelligent decisions on how do we want to assess and respond to our risk.
Okay. So we've logged out, we're going to log back in, and we're going to log in this time with a different user. And we'll have a compromised credential check. This is where you get to see that I can never spell Michael.
Is it A-E-E-A?
I get it, I'm always wrong. I'll try. So now I'm logged in to the portal with a different guy. I'm going to go to exactly the same link that I did before with Netskope. So this is a connection over to Salesforce. But notice what's happened this time. At this point, we're being told that we're going to do a compromised credential check, and we're going to send a call into Netskope with the user identifier that we've just done. And if it's compromised, you get MFA. So what's just happened, is that we've sent the identifier to Netskope. Netskope's responded that they believe this to be a compromised credential. It's going to move us into an MFA call, which would be the beginning of a password reset flow. So I'm going to do the MFA. Just arrived. Come on. There we go. You feel all kinds of Dick Tracy when that happens. It's awesome. So at this point, you see that we've done the MFA. We're being told that you need now to do a password change. And at this point, really what you would have done is you would have redirected the user post-MFA into a change password flow. We don't have that in the demo, but that's what this page would kind of do. You would really just send them over to your password management application and have them reset the password. Do we have more to do?
Yep, and then we have a couple more slides.
Oh, we have more slides. See, what am I doing? Me not paying attention.
That's right, I think there's like one or two.
We have questions. It just says questions.
Exactly, boom. Q&A.
Q&A.
I want to try to sneak in two questions. A, is the agent required in order to enforce what you displayed in the demo? And are there any policies synced to the client device that are defined in Netskope? Are there policies that are defined that are executed on the client?
Yeah, no, those are good questions. Yeah, so you don't need to have the client installed, and that's a good question. A lot of people think that for you to be able to control access that you have to have something on the endpoint. You don't. If you take a look at, if you're looking and you saw the URL, you notice it was rproxy.ghostscope.com. There's no client installed on this machine.
Nope.
So what ended up happening is when we authenticated with Ping did a 302 redirect and then sent us over to Netskope. Now your traffic's routing through Netskope at that point in time. And so there's nothing that needs to be installed on the endpoint. Answer your second question, I think it was in regards to, are there policies that get synced? And yes, there are. So if you do have the client installed, policies do get synced down to the client. The client does a few things. It does coaching. So you'll get a block page that comes up, highly customizable. You can put JavaScript in there, so if you want to get creative and do a lot of different unique things, you can. Typically what we see organizations doing is they're increasing their security posture throughout their cloud journey. They're going to go through and get some visibility, see what's happening there, get a nice baseline. Then they're going to listen to this part. This is important. They're going to make sure that they've got acceptable usage policies. They're going to make sure that that stuff is gone through legal, that it's been pushed out throughout the organization, it's been accepted. And at that point in time, once they've done that, they'll start enforcing. So for a little bit, they'll go in and start coaching. By the way, we have not, let's say, for example, Dropbox Our organization is standardized on using OneDrive as our cloud storage application. Here's the link to the acceptable usage policy, and then customize it however you want. And then after whatever that acceptable time is for the organization, then you can start actually blocking and stopping access. So.
Yeah. And certainly if you wanted to enforce a client requirement, we could have done that too. We don't in here. So there's no agent at all in here. All of that stuff was without it. But if you did want clients, you could light that up as well. Yeah. And as we send you through Netskope would detect that and drop the agent.
Yeah, and the client does have some value. We were speaking earlier. Yeah. You really need to think about what your use case is and what applications you're accessing, because they all have different authentication mechanisms and protocols that they use. So the example we were just talking about, keep in mind that's only web traffic, right? So this is only for web, but what happens when we have native applications? When we get into native applications, that's where we end up using the client, because we can now get in and actually look at that traffic on the endpoint. And then what he was mentioning is that if you have an application that you definitely want to protect, one of the options you can do is when you come in, if we can check and see if that client's installed. If it's not, we can just redirect them to it and have them install it. So great, now we've got it installed. Now we have visibility into the traffic. And then the last thing I'll bring up is that if you're like me, I'd be thinking, how does this actually work? How do I know what to stare? What traffic are you staring? Which applications? And we can get very granular, down to the point of where we can pick out, we can stare for iOS, Android, we could be on-prem, or it could be using the client. So I can look at it that way, and then I can depict what application. So for each application that's out there, we've got 28,000 in our database. I can determine how I want to steer that traffic. So there may be instances where you're like, maybe you have a BYOD initiative. Great. Well, we don't want to be seeing traffic from your end users' personal stuff. I could care less. I just care about our business's sanctioned applications. So with our client, you can steer that traffic only for those sanctioned applications where we have visibility and control, and then we just let the other stuff go directly out to the internet. And then we leverage policies to prevent bad things from happening and reducing our risk. So for example, make sure that sensitive data is not going out to a non-sanctioned application. So.
That was a long answer.
Very long.
That's what you get for asking 2 questions at once. Well, we'll give you 3 answers back.
3 back. Any other questions out there?
So I just wanted to point out one other thing that I don't know that was highly called out here. The compromised credentials component of that integration is actually an Optiv component that's plugged in as an adapter right into Ping. That goes out and uses the Netskope REST APIs to pull in compromised credentials database. It pulls in stuff from the anomaly database. So there's two databases that it goes out and integrates with. And then, of course, the workflow that you're able to configure to support that as you had done with the MFA, and then ultimately the change password component, which is also another part of that adapter kit that's involved there. Any other questions? I think this is the first one.
Yeah. Still logged in?
And then do window.
No, I think that's a great question. Yeah.
So I don't know that I can show you the Ping end of this. It's not my Ping Fed server, so that one. But the first part of the demo, it's really just a SAML proxy. So we're really just doing it. We're treating Netskope as the service provider for Salesforce, and they're treating Ping Fed as the IDP. So that one's a really simple integration. With this other integration, it's a jar file for us. So there's a package for the adapter. You add it to the server, and then you can chain it just like any other of our authentication adapters. And within, I don't know how much you know about Ping Federate, but we have a great authentication policy mechanism, so we can make decisions throughout an authentication event and bifurcate experience and switch things around. So that's really, it just gets chained in through that and then linked back.
Yeah,
to
and there's configuration parameters inside of the ping federate that once you configure that adapter, it's all right. It's all interface based. There's no config files or anything you have to go out and touch.
check boxes in a UI.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's not. And this is the Netskope side of it.
Yeah, so when you take a look, what we ended up doing was you had to go in and configure Salesforce to do a single sign-on, federate it. And then we come in here, we've got to move some certificates around so that we can get into the middle. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's what you're seeing here. And that's what this piece is here on the Netskope side. So there's a few things that need to happen. You've got to go and do a configuration within Salesforce, and then you've got to do a configuration within Ping Federate.
So Salesforce thinks that Netskope is the IDP.
That's how we get in the middle, yeah. So what you end up doing is, typically when I configure this, I'll have Ping configured and integrated with Salesforce. Once that's working, I come in and I grab the certs from them, and I put them into Netskope, and I swap them out with the Netskope certs, and now we're in the middle, and traffic flows through us. So that's kind of like the access broker piece of CASB.
Yep. Yeah, and that's all out of box. You don't have to do anything with that. It's just really simple. It's just SAML.
Okay, any further questions? Yes, sir.
Yeah, do you have ability to restrict access to specific resource?
Yeah, so give me an example of a specific resource. I'll show you some policies, things we can do. But
Like
like a what?
database table.
A database table? I guess that depends on how it's being served up. So,
But certainly things like files on OneDrive, and you can restrict the ability to download those or require MFA.
yeah, so if it's structured data, there's two ways to look at it. You can look at it as if it's structured data that's being stored in a platform, so like Salesforce, for example. We have the ability to integrate with Salesforce, look for sensitive information within these various fields. We also have the ability to integrate with them and encrypt specific fields that you'd like. There's another area where, let's say you had, maybe it is an Excel file, right? And in that, it's got specific tables and rows, and we can go in there and take a look at it from that aspect. But when it comes to databases, we really need to take a look at how that access is happening. We're not actually going to go and block access if you're like connecting up to Oracle or MySQL or MS SQL or we're looking at web-based traffic that's coming across, right? So web applications, not necessarily on that database side, unless, here's the other piece of it, unless you are using a service that's being offered in a cloud offering. So if we start taking a look at AWS, for example, or Azure, we do have the ability to look at, data lake storage, and then there's one other one I can't remember off the top of my head.
It's that other thing.
Yeah, but so there are some areas in there that we can look at it. So it depends on how that application's, because that's web traffic, right? Even though technically it's database traffic, it's web-based traffic until it gets into the relational database at that point. So we can actually apply constraints and controls. So.
All right, any further questions? All right, well, thank you very much. We have one more session to go, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes.
Cool. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.